everybody, welcome back to another episode of Zinespiration. Today we're talking with Lanier Burton about the comics that he writes and creates. As always, I'm Ryan, and with me is Craig. Hi, Craig.
Hello. Hello.
Hi, Lanier.
Hi, how's everybody doing out there? Thanks to Ryan and Craig for having me on their channel. I'm very grateful to be featured here. Them taking the time out to do this. I don't take it for granted. So, this will be pretty great.
Well, thanks so much for being here, man. We're super stoked.
Yeah. I appreciate you guys because you shed light on a new generation, that's coming up right now. So not just myself, but my contemporaries, and I know that we each do different things. But I mean, collectively, we're all a part of this big culture. So I think it's important what you guys do.
It's funny that you say the new generation because Craig and I are a couple of old farts. You know what I mean? But like for us, this is really cool that we get to see the young and up and coming creators start. So it is very cool.
Yeah, from like all around the world too. I mean, it always baffles me like how how that can be.
Yeah. Yeah, it is cool this where with this, with Skype, we've got the great opportunity to be able to have a chat face to face basically and find out what you have going on and things like that. So what about if we start with you introducing yourself a little bit, maybe talk a little bit about your work, tell us and others about what you get into.
All right, so name's Lanier Burton. Before I ever did comics, I used to do music. So I was doing a lot of producing for a lot of artists. I was writing songs, directing videos, things like that. Funny enough, I never ever imagined that I'd be doing comic books. Like it was always like on my bucket list. I was like, yeah, one day I'll make a comic book or something, whatever. But I was like, it'll probably never happen. You know how that goes, right? So, I was in the music industry doing shows and things like that. And it got to the point where I was thinking about moving to Atlanta because, Atlanta's a hotbed for music and production and all that good stuff. So when I was there, something about it, just, I don't know, like, if I felt like something was tugging at me to not pursue music or that it was just draining on me because I was just in it for so long and I just wasn't seeing any results for it and things like that. So on our drive back to Wisconsin, I noticed a sign that said "Danger Falling Rocks." I don't know why that clicked in my head, but I was like, "Falling Rock." Like that would sound like a cool name for like a town or something or in a story or something like that, right? So when we got back to Wisconsin, I was just writing this idea for Fallen Rock, right? And then I was like, oh yeah, so okay, it can have like two kids, and then there's like a lab accident, and then they get these powers or something like that, and the town will be Fallen Rock. But then I was like, oh, that title's kind of lame, and because I'm really big on the 1960s Marvel titles, like Tales of Suspense and Amazing Fantasy. I love titles like that. So I was like, oh, let me call it True Science Fiction. To be like a big anthology series with all these different characters and things like that. So from there, I called it True Science Fiction. Um, I went on like Upwork. I found the perfect artist to help me illustrate the story. Ria Yu. She's actually from Russia. Can you believe that?
Cool.
So, I sent her the script that I made and the layouts and the storyboard that I did, and then that's how we came up with the first issue of True Science Fiction. See, this is the select collection, so it has two stories in one. But let me show you
Mhm.
guys first cover here. Yeah, so then we made this baby here, the first True Science Fiction.
That's cool. And it's really interesting to me that uh, as a writer, you decided to pursue the comic book route. Like I do a bit of writing myself, and I'd like to maybe do maybe a comic book, but it's not my first full thought. I guess I'd say it's interesting that you decided that. That's really cool. That's a really cool idea.
Yeah, my first exposure to comic books in general, because honestly, I didn't know what a zine was until like last year, until I really got into the gist of it all. That's when I found out what a zine was. But my first exposure to a comic book was the X-Men comics, because my mom's ex-boyfriend, he was like a huge fan of the X-Men, and this was like in the late 90s, so of course, X-Men was everywhere. And I just remember going into his room once, and he just had like stacks of these X-Men books all over the place. And I was like, I'm like, what is this? I was just looking through them. I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool or whatever. Yeah, so that was one of my first exposures there. But also on the other side, I was introduced to manga and anime, and that started with like Dragon Ball, and I started reading that stuff. So that was also like a dual influence. So that's why I like to think of myself as a bridge between two worlds, because I love American comics and I love manga equally, and I try to synergize the two of those together.
Cool. So do you have so maybe now you do, but when you first started making comics, do you have any friends around you? Did you have some friends that were into comics as well, or were you sort of a bit of a lone wolf?
It's funny you say that because I was working at Half Price Books. Are you guys familiar with that store? Yeah, so I was working at Half Price Books, and we're all really nerdy around there, right? So at that time, I picked up one of these little notebooks here, and I was like, you know what? I kind of just want to make like some little comic book stories just for my own enjoyment, and then for the people that I was working with enjoyment as well too. So then I would make like my first character there was Metal Shop Girl, and I was like, okay, let me try to like figure this out. So I would draw the panels on this side here, and then I write down all the the dialogue and what's going on right there. And then I would pass the book around work and stuff, and then everybody would be laughing about it, and they'd be like, oh, why don't you just make this like a real thing or something? And then I kept thinking about it. I was like, yeah, I mean, why not? But at that time, I still wasn't too sure about that because I was focused on music up until the Atlanta trip.
Well, one of the things I was going to ask was about like your writing process, right? Because from doing comics, that there's several different styles of writing. Like you could do a full-on script, and basically lay out the script for the artist to, I want this kind of a shot, a close-up, this sort of lighting, and the dialogue is already prepped out. And then there's like the old Marvel way, which is, you come up with a plot outline, let the artist know. The artist does up a few pages, and you go back and dialogue in based on the art, right? Do you lean to like one specific style of writing, or is it kind of a amalgamation? Like, how do you actually write the strips?
So I always write the scripts so they're really easy to understand, and like I don't add too many like details or anything like that, because I feel like that kind of bogs down my style of writing. I just write it, so it's really engaging and it's really, easy to understand, just easy to read and understand. And then I'll always do the storyboards for my own comics. So I'll get like my big sketchbook, and then I'll draw out how I want each of the panels on the page to be. So yeah, like little doodles, and then I'll go over it again with the artist. So I feel like if I can draw it, even if it's kind of shitty, then definitely somebody else can draw it way better. But I always feel like it's better. To me, it's best to give the artist a blueprint, like a really loose blueprint for where I'm seeing how this scene should look, or the panel, or the angles and things like that. So I always like to draw it first.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
But I'm really familiar with how Stan Lee used to do it, the Marvel method. And, I'm still impressed to this day that he wrote so many comic books, because when you look at the Silver Age, it is unbelievable how many credits his name has. And I'm just like, how did he have time to do Iron Man and then do like Hulk and Spider-Man, X-Men? I mean, I'm like, why does he do it?
Yeah, you look at some of those old books. Like when I first got into comics, it was the late '80s, and I was a big Superman. I don't know if you like my Superman movie poster behind me. I'm a Superman fan, long term. And so when I was a kid and I got into these comics, I started getting older comics because you could get them in the cheap bins then, right? Like some of the old ones. And there was one Superman artist named Kurt Swan who it seemed like he drew every Superman comic ever made from about 1950 to 1985. And the fact that he was doing like 2 books a month, it seemed, and then like these superstar artists of today always seem to be behind on their deadlines, and stuff's always late coming out.
Yeah.
And you look at the old Silver Age stuff, Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, Kurt Swan, Schaffenberger, those guys, and it's like they were so incredibly productive and always on time. It's like I don't know where the disconnect is.
I think it's because at that point in time, you know, they saw it as like, this is how I feed my family. You know, this is how I get my money to pay the rent, feed my kids. You know, they saw it as like, you know, a genuine job. Not to say that they didn't love it, but they saw it as a work, and, you know, they wanted to work hard at it, and they wanted to be really diligent. And I think nowadays, the industry's kind of lacking in that kind of work ethic. You know, it's very by the numbers, you know, formulaic. A lot of this stuff it can be easily reset. You know, it's just not. I don't know. The passion just doesn't seem like it's there anymore. I think they should really start to embrace like digital. You know, I'm not saying that it should replace printing, and you know, I love prints. I love collecting comics, but they definitely have to step up how they present things digitally. Maybe they can make like a streaming little app where you pay like a 1 month fee and you can like read all this great stuff from all these different publishers, right? And
So,
then you know it has
so they don't have that in the US because they've got that here in Japan. People do that here in Japan. They
yeah,
they have like an app where
Shonen
they have
Jump.
like a anime and they can read all
Oh,
the
it's
anime they want.
Comixology or something, I think it's called, where you can just like read comics. But what I think, and this gets back to, we've talked about this before on the show about digital zines, right? And people just scanning their zines in PDF, and it's, you know, you just kind of flip through it, and it's like, you know, in the digital age, it should be a little more interactive. If I'm going to get a digital comic versus a physical comic, so physical comic, I want to hold it and tangible and touch it and see the words and blah blah blah. If it's a digital comic, I think that the images should almost move, not like a cartoon, but the panels should almost come in, and I would love to see like the word balloon pop out with the words filling in and almost taking you on the journey of the story rather than you know, the old fashioned, well, here's a picture that we drew and we turned it into a digital image and you can look at it.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Because I mean, since the comic is presented at a different medium, then it should use that medium's, you know, to its full advantage. And
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that. You know, something should be done, but I just don't know what either of the big two are thinking about these days. Lord have mercy. Thank thank God for the little guys like me and you know the other guys, us indie guys, because we're at least trying to think forward and you know.
It sounds pretentious anytime I say it, but it's so true. Is like I only buy indie comics now, with the occasional, like I'm reading the DC's doing the He-Man and the Masters of the Multiverse, and like that's my childhood, so I have to read that.
Okay. Yeah.
But, like I just said I love Superman. I have no interest whatsoever in reading new Superman comics. I just don't care, and you know what I mean. Like I've read enough Superman comics to, you know, I've got enough stories. I don't need any more. I don't care.
So
I was trying
let's get onto your stuff again a little bit more. So you've got this so your true science fiction. It seems like you've got the shirt here. Is it shirt or sweater or something?
mm-hmm.
So it seems like you've sort of gone all out. Sort of not early, but sort of all out. You've got the color printed comic books. You've got the shirt. What's sort of your thinking and your sort of your drive behind that sort of?
So I always wanted to be a part of like multimedia. So I don't believe in just sticking to one little medium and just doing that. I always want to expand and do different things with my products or with my art. So basically, that's pretty much my main goal. I want to expand. I want to innovate in different fields with my characters and my stories. You know, I want to create merchandise like this for people to wear and, you know, consume if they want. You know, of course, I'm always going to have the books, but I've actually done soundtracks for my comics as well. So, you know, I'll put out a comic and then I do a like a 5-song soundtrack where I like boil down some instrumentals that kind of fit the themes of the books itself. I always do like little voiceover videos for on my YouTube channel, where I'll take the panels and then I'll do the voices of the characters. I'll add sound effects. I'll do the music and stuff. I try to make everything that I do really immersive and interactive, so people can really get into the world and experience it like how I experience my favorite medium, like
Mm.
any of the Shonen Jump stuff or Spider Man or whatever. They always have video games, TVs, whatever. Like that's pretty much my mentality was to attack it in that way.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, it sort of almost ties back to some of the stuff you guys were talking about the interactive comic books.
Hmm.
Like, yeah, wouldn't it? Like it would be quite interesting looking through like a digital comic book, and you've got the voiceover instead of just seeing the image itself and reading it along. You've got the actual character's voice reading it out or something like that. That would be quite
Oh
cool.
yeah, because I mean, I like to think I have a beautiful voice, so I think it's only fair that my fans and viewers out there, you guys get to hear it and experience that for free, of course. So, thank you.
Don't go writing checks you can't cash, man. You may be singing on the show in a minute.
Hey, I'll cash them as soon as I get that stimulus check. When I get that, I'll be cashed. Trust me. Okay. But yeah, so far I've published 7 comics, but by the beginning of next year or so, I'll have 14 in total. So I'm always working on different titles. So I have True Science Fiction. That's my main. That's the one with the most views that I have so far. I have Gimme the Loot, which is this comic here. It's
the
more
the
inspired
most
by
views where the most views where.
oh on Webtoons. I'm sorry.
Ah, okay, that's all right. Just to let
I
people
was
know.
reading Gimme the Loot yesterday in preparation for this, and it was a lot of fun. Like I had a lot of fun reading Gimme the Loot. Like there's a lot of tongue in cheek to it, and it paces well. It's got this like not Looney Tunes old style, but there's an old style animation to it, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but I know it's not Looney Tunes. It's like some old like Popeye feel to the pace of it. I think it's really clever.
Thank you very much. I'll always when I write, I always want to diversify myself. So when I had published True Science Fiction, I had the idea to do like a comedy book, right? But I wanted to do it in the style of old comic strips from like back in the 30s, 40s, 50s. Because I was reading a book on like the origin of comics itself, and I felt inspired to create something that was an homage to like Nancy, Popeye, Crazy Cat, things of that nature, right? So then that's when I came up with Gimme the Loot, and then there's Robbie. He's the little mischievous thief who, he's always breaking the fourth wall, stealing things. It's something interesting. And I always wanted to do it in like the little black and white style and things of that nature. It's so random, but you ever wonder like what's the artist's favorite scene to draw or their favorite panel that they've ever done? You ever think of that? Like I always think of that. Like what was their favorite page that they did? I always wonder because there's just so much detail that they put into everything. Amazing. I wish I could draw, but thankfully I'm a pretty good writer, if I do say so.
Oh, and then how do you it's a nice little segue actually, because I want to know a little bit about your system of when you work and when you write. Do you have like a set time, or do you just write wherever, whenever, however? How do you sort of go about it?
I'm kind of a night owl, so most times I'll write at night. Um, and if I'm at work, I'll always keep like a sheet of paper on me or something, and then I'll just scribble down like a random idea, and then like it'll just grow in my head the whole time until I get off work, and then I just write everything down then and there. I like to listen to R&B music when I write, or like hip hop music. That always keeps me focused on what I'm doing.
So to get back to Craig's point of, you're doing the T-shirts, you're doing the comics, you're trying to establish yourself as like a brand, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Where did you get that idea from? Like there had to be someone that you saw doing it and go, you know what, I think I could do that.
I think that mostly comes from when I was in music, because when you're doing like indie music and stuff like that, you always see people put their band names on T-shirts, They always have a website. They have multiple videos. Of course, they have their music, but they always have a lot of merchandise and things of that nature to help promote them. Stickers, flyers, buttons, all that. So that really comes from like my music hustle. So I carried that over to comic books. So now I've extended my brand that way.
Yeah, when I was in a band, we had T-shirts. We had patches. We made with spray paint and a stencil. Stickers, zines. We made zines as well. But yeah, it's sort of cool.
Yeah,
I um
post. I would
I
read books about it all the time, like how to build a brand, how to market yourself. Like business. I would read business books, 48 Laws of Power. I was always just because I was working at Half Price Books, and they assigned me to the business section, so I would always read that, and then I would gravitate towards the marketing section because I know a lot of people they're strictly just creators and they're not businessmen. So I felt that it was important for me to grow my knowledge as far as the business.
Absolutely, man. I 100% agree. I believe that the best artists and creators in the world are out there, and we'll never know who they are because they don't know how to market themselves. They
Yeah,
need someone to do it for them, which is totally cool, but they won't reach out to someone to do it for them, and we'll never know what they've created. They will just fade away with time.
And that's some of the reason we're
yeah.
trying to do this as well, to just to help for a bit more exposure for some people that aren't as good, or that also are like you, that also would that just adds another little notch to the belt for you, sort of thing. It's
Yeah, I always tell people if they're creative, just try to put yourself out there more because I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of people can draw good. A lot of people can write good, but it's all about how you promote yourself so people will notice you. Because I mean, if you don't promote yourself or put yourself out there, then you're just one of many. You don't stand out.
So,
So
what do you
yeah,
is the future? What do you think is the future of like independent publishing, DIY culture?
Hmm. I think the way things are going now, I think a lot of, well, of course, as I was saying before, it's like this big multimedia thing. So people are always looking for new books or new material to adapt to the small screen or the big screen. I think at this point they might just cut out the middleman and just start looking for people like myself or other my contemporaries, and then just go straight to us and be like, you know what, we see that you build yourself up like this, that, and the third. We want to adapt your work. We want to sign you to this deal or something like that. I think it's starting to get to that point, especially if someone can really build themselves up from the ground up, and they don't need a publisher or something like that. They get to the point where they can just do all the deals themselves. So I think that's ultimately where it can be, and that's really thanks to the generation before us, like the Image Comics and the Dark Horse, the indie guys who made that a possible thing for us. So I tip my hat to them for sure.
yeah, like in a very short amount of time, like 50, 60 years, which still is a long time, but relatively short. Comics have gone from completely underground right up to making major movies about them. And then, like you say, then once it's sort of like a bit of maybe a trickle down effect. Those major ones have been made, and everyone's seen enough Batman movies, Spider-Man movies, dun dun dun, and then start bringing in sort of the next tier sort of characters, and then start looking for maybe independent filmmakers will start looking for independent comic creators to sort of work together.
Yeah,
Well,
because
and
it's all
that's
like
happening for
a
years. Like a lot of people don't realize that, like Men in Black, for instance, was a comic book before it was a movie. It was this little independent comic there was, I think, maybe 1,000 copies of it made or something, and a movie producer saw it, and it was that mid '90s period where like Batman was getting big, and they were just like anything that they could get cheap that they could make a movie about. They were doing so. Men in Black, The Mask,
Teenage
Tank
Mutant
Girl,
Ninja Turtles.
Ninja Turtle. Oh yeah, well that was a multi-billion dollar industry. That was crazy to me.
Started in someone's apartment. Can you believe that?
Yeah,
I mean, anything's possible if you know truly put yourself into it.
I think anyone who wants to make comics, whether they want to write them or draw them or however, I think they need to learn about Eastman and Laird and making the Ninja Turtles because it's like the best story ever.
It really is, and it's so inspirational. Cause I mean, it's just such this wacky idea, and they just completely just went ahead with it. They invested their money into it, which is so important out there for a lot of indie guys out there watching this now. Invest your money in your work, okay? You put your money into it, and you'll get money out of it. Trust me, okay? So remember that. So they invested in that, and then look at it now. It paid back in dividends.
So, what would you? So, like, in addition to for independents to put money into their own, like invest into their own work. What other things would you say to young creators or young people that or even not so young but like new to comic book art and wanting to get into it? What sort of advice would you give out?
I would say, just dedicate some time to your craft. If you're a writer, write the best you can. If you're an artist, draw the best you can. But specifically to writers, so if you feel like you have this great story, right, and it's written perfectly, I would say, save some money to hire an artist to make it for you. Because I know a lot of other writers, unlike myself, they have this fantasy that their script is so good that an artist will just draw it for free. That's not what's gonna happen. Don't even think that's gonna happen. All right, you want to get something done, put some money into it. Find the right artist and invest in that. Because you gotta be realistic. Nobody wants to do anything for free, and you have to build a rapport with these people.
Well, I guess before we finish up here, is there anything you want to add? Anything you want to say to say at all that we might not have touched on today?
Oh yeah, I brought this out. This is another one of the series that I've done. It's called B-Sides, and it's more like a cosmic horror sci-fi book, and just like with the other books that I do, I employ different artists. So this one has a more of a really pure comic book style, but it's kind of like scratchy and old looking, and just it's
I see
really
a lot of Jack Kirby influence there. That's
yeah.
the first thing I see is
Oh
yeah.
yeah, it's super Jack Kirby. This one was inspired by Fourth World. I love that. I love that whole thing. Just great stories right there. I'm telling you, when Marvel and DC were in their prime in the Silver Age and a little bit into 80s and whatnot, I felt like they had the best stories. It was just great. I read that stuff a lot to this day.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, I think I haven't got anything else. Have you got anything else, Ryan?
I have asked all my questions.
Yeah, me too. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Thanks to all you wonderful people out here watching their channel and supporting them. They're doing a great service to, the little guys like myself and even to my contemporaries. So hats off to these two. They can't hear you clap, but just clap for them. There you go. That's for you,
Well,
guys.
please remember us when true science fiction is huge. Please remember us.
Oh yeah, I'll tell my agent all about you guys. He'll get right to you. Yeah.
Nice.
So
And if you
there's
tour
links down below for Linear stuff. You can go check it out at Webtoons. You've got stuff on Amazon as well. I saw. We'll put some links down there so that you should go buy Linear's comics.
I actually have an official website too. It's coolestdolo.com. That's COOLESDOLO.com. So you want the real McCoy? Come to your boy. All right, there you go.
All right, very cool.
Amazing.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, good night, everybody.
All right, thank you for
Good
watching.
night.